Now we're going to be using equations. Now, what does equation mean? It's basically something when there's an equal sign in there. So I'm going to use equations, right? I have information as a table, and I'm going to use graphs. You guys can see the graph there. So this is the cost of a flight is related to the distance traveled. Okay, so let me understand what I'm given here. The table here, it says that 350 kilometers, it cost me $82.60. 1,750 kilometers will cost me $222. Okay, and then there's some kilometers and there's some costs. So it says the cost of a flight is related to the distance traveled. Okay, so I see that. But then these points were actually graphed here on the right side. You guys see this first point. Let me emphasize this first point. Notice the distance at the bottom is kilometers. So I see 1,000. So I'm going to say this is 500. So 350 kilometers makes sense. It's a little bit to the left of that. Now on my numbers from the left side, it seems like it's a little bit less than 100 because the cost is 82.60. So the points were given. So we plot these points. But then I drew this line. I'm gonna give this line. Later on in the future, you're gonna learn how to come out with that line. Now that line is what we call the line of best fit. Basically, what that line represents is if I was to have a line, half of my points should be above the line and half of my points should be above the line. So the we call it the line of best fit. Now, so I came out with that line, and that line, according to my notations here, it gives me an equation. Right? You guys see this equation. I call it equation because there's an equal sign in there. Now, that equation, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use the graph to have an idea what to expect, but I'm going to use the equation to find out the actual number. Okay, so using that information, I'm going to use 3 questions here. So using this model, what will be the cost of a flight that travels 1,300 kilometers? Round your answer to the nearest dollar. Okay, so 1,300 kilometers. Because I'm going to use this to approximate this. So 1,300 kilometers should be what, about somewhere about here, because it seems like each square I'm counting by 500. So 1,300 kilometers should be about there. Okay, and then this number ends up being more than 200. So notice how I'm using the graph to kind of have an idea what my answer will be, to have a good estimate. So it's a little more than 200. Okay, good. Whatever I do, I'm gonna expect my answer to be a little more than 200. Now, how am I gonna find out the actual answer? I'm gonna use the equation. But x, that instead of an x, I see the x value, because I'm looking at the x-axis here, is related to distance. So instead of an x, I'm gonna write distance. Instead of the y value, I'm gonna look at the cost. Now here it is asking me what will be the cost. So I don't know what y is. So I'm just gonna go y. It's equal to 0.156 times 1,300 plus 5.06. Again, I'm using that equation. But notice how instead of x, I use 1,300 because that's the distance. Now this thing will give me the cost. Okay. I use my calculator and I go 0.156 times 1,300. And this says, I use according to my calculator, I get 202.8 plus 5.06 because I just did the multiplication. I didn't do my addition yet. When I add this, it gives me 207.86. So my actual cost will be $207.86. However, here I see round your answer to the nearest dollar. Okay, so they don't want to deal with cents. They don't want to deal with change. So it's either $207 or 208. Okay, so I look at my first numbered in the cents. If it's 5 or more, it goes up. If it's 4 or less, I ignore it. So in this case, my answer will be $208. Remember how I said I used the graph to kind of have an idea what to expect, and I said a little more than 200? So 208 sounds about right. Okay, so let's take a look at example B, question B. According to the model, how would a 4,800 kilometer flight cost? Round your answer to the nearest dollar. So 4,800 kilometers. Whoa, my graph doesn't go that high. So somewhere about here, that's where 4,800 will be. Now, if I extend my line, oh, definitely for sure more than $500, right? I expect my answer to be definitely more than 500, and not just barely, like pretty good distance. Now, I'm not gonna say, hopefully not like in the thousands, but okay, I expect this to be more than 500. So I'm gonna use my equation. I'm just gonna write it down. I have it in my mind here, so I'm gonna go y. It's equal to 0.156 times 4,800 plus 5.06. That's the equation that we were given, right? Now I can multiply it. 0.156 times 4,800 gives me 748.8 plus 5.06. Okay, when I add this, it gives me 753.86. I have to round this to the nearest dollar as well. So I'm gonna say my answer is 754. Good. Kind of expected that, so that's not bad. Now, what distance, so looking at question C, what distance corresponds to a cost of $140? Round your answer to the nearest kilometer. Okay, let me take a look at my graph. What does this mean? What they're asking is, imagine you paid $140. How many kilometers was the flight? So let me zoom in here. 140 kilometers, it's about, $140. It's about here. It's probably about 1,000 miles, probably a little bit less than that. So somewhere less than 1,000 miles. That's what I'm expecting. Okay, cool. So let's see. Now, I'm just gonna write this as 140 because the cost is the y value. 140 is equal to 0.156 times x plus 5.06. Okay, so now this is a little more complicated. I want a term that has the x by itself. So this plus 5.06, let me move it over here as a minus 5.06. So I have 134.94 is equal to 0.156 times x. And then lastly, let me divide this by the decimal in front of x. So I'm gonna divide this by 0.156. Okay, so 134.94 divided by 0.156 gives me 865. Oh, cool. Yeah. I expected less than 1,000, so that sounds about right. 865. Okay, let's take a look at a different example. So here's the cost of a flight is related to the distance traveled. So now I have some miles and I have the cost. So pretty much the same idea. This can be modeled by the equation. So now I have a different equation. Let me highlight the equation that I have because I'm going to be using it a lot, where X is the distance in miles and Y is the cost in dollars. I can use the graph to approximate this. So example A, it says, use this model. What will be the cost of a flight that travels 525 miles? Okay, 525 miles. That's a little more than 500, obviously. It seems like 550, probably it's about here. When I go up, okay, so more than 80. More than 80 sounds about right. Okay, keep in mind my graph is just, I did just an approximation, but okay, more than 80 is what I'm expecting. So I have an idea what to expect. I remembered the equation that I was given. So I'm just gonna go y is equal to 0.0787. Like I said, this was given to me times, okay, how many miles? 525 plus 39.6. Okay, if you guys are wondering where did he get this equation, right there. You guys see it? Y is equal to 0.0787 times X plus 39.6. That's where I got this. Okay, so let me multiply my numbers. 0.0787 times 525. And then my result, let me add it to 39.6. I end up getting that Y is equal to 80.9175. But it says round it to the nearest dollar. Okay, so there's a bunch of decimals, but the first decimal number is big enough, so it pushes my 80 over. So I'm gonna say this is $81. Yeah, pretty much what I expected, right? I said a little more than 80, so 81 sounds about right. I know my graph, I was just estimating my on the graph, so good. Now example B, according to the model, how much would a 3,025 mile flight cost? Whoa, 3,025. Here in the graph, it will be way up here, right? And if my line extended, okay, more than 200. Not like a lot more, but yeah, more than 200. That's what I should be expecting. So let's see. According to the model, how much would a 3,025 flight cost? Round your answer to the nearest dollar. Okay, so let me use my equation. Y is equal to 0.0787 times 3,025, and then in my result I add 39.6. Okay, so that gives me 277.6675. My first decimal number is big enough, so it pushes the previous number up. So my answer in this case will be $278. Pretty cool. Now, last example. What distance corresponds to a cost of 130? Round your answer to the nearest mile. Okay, so the cost is 130. So let me go 130 is equal to 0.0787x plus 39.6. Let me subtract that 39.6. So I have that 90.6 0.4 is equal to 0.0787x. Let me divide by that long decimal. 90.4 divided by 0. There's a point there, we don't see it. So 90.4 divided by 0.0787, it tells me is 1,148 point, and then there's a 66582. So let me just write my first 6. It says round it to the nearest whole number. This first decimal number is big enough. So I'm gonna say my answer is $1,149. I mean 1,149 miles. Good.